She said I was her favorite student, then kissed me like she'd waited a lifetime to mean it. Let us uncover what really happened. The words, when Ms. Hayes first spoke them, had drifted into the hushed quiet of the after-school classroom, like motes of dust dancing in a stray sunbeam, seemingly innocuous, almost throwaway. You know, Alara, she'd said, her voice that low, melodic timbre that always seemed to vibrate somewhere deep in my sternum. You're rapidly becoming my favorite student. She was looking down at the essay I'd just handed her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, lips that I had, with a growing sense of shame and an even more potent fascination, begun to study with an almost scholarly intensity. I'd mumbled something incoherent, a polite, self-deprecating noise, my cheeks flushing with a heat that had nothing to do with the stuffy September air. Favorite? The word echoed, a strange, unsettling resonance. It wasn't the kind of casual praise one might offer a diligent pupil. There was a weight to it, a subtle emphasis on the my, that made my stomach perform a series of anxious, fluttering somersaults. Miss Evelyn Hayes. She had arrived at Northwood High mid-semester the previous year, a sudden, enigmatic replacement for old Mr. Carmichael, who'd retired with an equally sudden declaration that he'd rather face a horde of Visigoths than another class of indifferent teenagers. Miss Hayes was different. She wasn't old, not in the way Mr. Carmichael had been, with his chalk-dusted suits and his tendency to fall asleep mid-lecture. She was perhaps in her early 30s, though there was an ageless quality to her, a quiet, self-possessed composure that made her seem both younger and infinitely older than her years. Her dark hair, the color of polished mahogany, was usually swept up in a loose, elegant chignon that seemed to defy gravity, revealing the long, graceful column of her neck, a neck that I often found my gaze drifting towards during her lectures on romantic poetry or the subtle ironies of Victorian literature. Her eyes, a startling shade of deep sapphire, fringed by thick, dark lashes, were the kind of eyes that seemed to see everything, to absorb everything, with an unnerving, almost unnerving, perceptiveness. They could be warm, sparkling with a dry, intelligent humor when a student made a particularly astute comment, or they could be cool, appraising, when faced with a poorly constructed argument or a display of adolescent apathy. When those sapphire eyes met mine, which they seemed to do with increasing, and for me, alarming, frequency, a strange electric current would pass between us, a silent acknowledgement of something. I didn't know what. I didn't dare to name it. But it was there. A palpable force in the air. A subtle shift in the atmosphere of the classroom. I told myself it was just admiration. Intellectual appreciation. She was a brilliant teacher, passionate about her subject, with a gift for making even the most arcane literary concepts feel urgent and alive. I was a good student, eager, attentive, always prepared. It was natural that we would develop a certain rapport. But the way my heart would perform that strange, unwilling little leap when she called my name, the way my palms would grow clammy when I approached her desk with a question, the way her scent, a subtle, intoxicating blend of old books, Earl Grey tea, and something else, something uniquely her, something I couldn't quite identify but found increasingly, disturbingly, alluring, would make my head swim. That wasn't just intellectual appreciation, that was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Something forbidden. The favorite student comment, innocuous as it might have seemed to an outside observer, had lodged itself in my mind like a splinter, a persistent, nagging irritant that I couldn't dislodge. It replayed on an endless loop, her voice, that low, melodic timbre, caressing the words, imbuing them with a significance that both thrilled and terrified me. Had she meant it? Or was it just a casual, throwaway remark, a teacherly platitude designed to encourage a promising pupil? I dissected the moment, a forensic analysis of tone, expression, context, the faint smile, the way her eyes had flickered up to meet mine for a fraction of a second, the subtle emphasis on the my. No, It hadn't been casual. There had been something else there. Something knowing. Something deliberate. The thought sent a fresh wave of heat through me, a confusing, exhilarating, terrifying warmth that settled low in my stomach. The classroom, usually a place of intellectual comfort, of familiar routine, began to feel different, charged with a new, unsettling potential. Every interaction with Miss Hayes, however brief, however mundane, became a source of intense scrutiny, of desperate, hopeful, fearful analysis. Did she hold my gaze a moment longer than necessary? Did her fingers brush against mine when she handed back a paper? Was there a subtle shift in her voice when she addressed me, a softening, an intimacy that wasn't there when she spoke to the other students? I was becoming an obsessive, a scholar of her every gesture, her every intonation, her every fleeting expression. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. It was driving me slowly, deliciously, mad. My carefully constructed world, the one where I was Lena, the good student, the sensible girl, the one with the perfectly nice, perfectly boring boyfriend named Mark, was beginning to tilt, to waver, its foundations shaken by the arrival of this enigmatic woman with her sapphire eyes, and her voice like a cello string, and her quiet, unsettling, irresistible allure. The garden of my life, so neat, so orderly, was about to be invaded by a strange, beautiful, terrifying flower whose name I didn't yet know, but whose intoxicating fragrance was already beginning to consume me. And the most terrifying part? A part of me, a reckless, desperate part, wanted to let it bloom, to see what strange, beautiful, dangerous fruit it might bear. The weeks following Ms. Hayes' favorite student pronouncement were a masterclass in sustained, agonizing, and utterly intoxicating tension. The classroom, once a neutral space, became a stage for our silent, nuanced drama. I found myself acutely aware of her every movement, the way she paced before the blackboard as she spoke, her dark skirt swirling almost imperceptibly around her long legs, the way she'd pause, mid-sentence, a thoughtful frown creasing her brow, before delivering a particularly incisive point about metaphysical conceits or the unreliable narrator. Her passion for literature was infectious, but it was her passion itself, the sheer force of her intellect, and the quiet intensity of her delivery, that truly captivated me. She didn't just teach texts, she inhabited them, her voice rising and falling with the cadence of poetry, her eyes flashing with a fierce intelligence when she dissected a complex theme. And I, her favorite, felt as though these performances were, in some small, secret way, for me. She started calling on me more frequently, her sapphire eyes locking with mine, a silent challenge, an invitation to engage, to delve deeper. My answers, usually hesitant and carefully considered, became more confident, more articulate, fueled by a desperate desire to impress her, to meet the unspoken expectations I felt radiating from her. Sometimes, after I'd offered a particularly insightful comment, that faint, enigmatic smile would touch her lips, and her eyes would hold mine for a beat longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement, a shared moment of intellectual communion that would leave me breathless, my heart pounding a triumphant, illicit rhythm. The other students, with their bored sighs and their surreptitious phone checking, faded into an irrelevant backdrop. There was only Miss Sans like Harns, Hayes, and there was me, and the invisible, crackling current that flowed between us, a current that was growing stronger, more insistent, with each passing day. The small, seemingly insignificant gestures, the ones I had begun to obsessively catalogue, continued, each one a fresh log on the pyre of my burgeoning infatuation. A lingering touch when she handed me a book, her fingers cool and surprisingly firm against mine. A shared glance across the crowded classroom, a fleeting, conspiratorial smile that seemed to say, "We understand this, don't we? We see the world in a way these others do not." The way she would sometimes pause by my desk, her hip brushing lightly against my arm, As she addressed the class, her scent, that intoxicating blend of old books and Earl Grey tea, enveloping me in a dizzying, disorienting cloud. These moments were like tiny, exquisite tortures, each one a fresh assault on my carefully constructed defenses, each one a reminder of the forbidden, dangerous, and utterly irresistible pull I felt towards her. I started to manufacture excuses to stay after class, to linger in her presence, to bask in the focused intensity of her attention. I'd feign confusion about an assignment, a deliberate misinterpretation of a poem, just to hear her explain it to me. Her voice that low, melodic timbre, her face close to mine, her sapphire eyes searching mine for understanding. These after-school sessions became a ritual, a secret, stolen intimacy. The classroom, empty of other students, transformed into a private sanctuary, a world unto itself. The late afternoon sun would slant through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, casting her in a soft, almost ethereal glow. And we would talk, not just about literature, but about ideas, about life, about the strange, beautiful, terrifying complexities of the human heart. She had a way of drawing me out, of making me feel as though my thoughts, my opinions, my half-formed adolescent philosophies were not just valid, but interesting, profound, even. She listened, truly listened, her head tilted slightly, her gaze attentive, her occasional questions probing, insightful, challenging me to think more deeply, to articulate myself more clearly. In those moments, I felt seen, understood, in a way I had never felt with anyone before, not even with Mark, my perfectly nice, perfectly boring boyfriend, whose conversations rarely strayed beyond the latest football scores or the plot of the most recent superhero movie. With Ms. Hayes, it was different. It was as if our minds were attuned to the same frequency, as if we spoke a secret, silent language that no one else could understand. And the physical awareness, the simmering, unspoken desire, it was always there, a constant, low-level hum, beneath the surface of our intellectual sparring. The way her knee would sometimes brush against mine under the small confines of her desk, the way her scent would intensify when she leaned closer, her breath warm against my cheek as she pointed out a passage in a book. The way her eyes would sometimes drop, just for a fraction of a second, to my lips, before flickering back up to meet mine, a silent, unspoken question hanging heavy in the air between us. I was playing with fire, I knew, dancing on the razor's edge of a dangerous, forbidden precipice. But the thrill of it, the intoxicating allure of her presence, of her attention, of the unspoken, illicit promise that shimmered in the space between us, it was too potent, too addictive, to resist. My carefully ordered world was unraveling, its neat, predictable patterns dissolving into a chaotic, exhilarating, terrifying kaleidoscope of new emotions, new desires, new forbidden possibilities. And Ms. Hayes, with her sapphire eyes and her cello string voice and her enigmatic, irresistible allure, she was the catalyst, the conductor, the beautiful, dangerous, intoxicating storm at the very center of it all. The favorite student comment, which had initially felt like a singular, startling event, began to reoccur, subtly woven into the fabric of our interactions, each iteration a fresh spark on the already smoldering embers of my obsession. It was never overt, never something another student might necessarily pick up on, but it was there, in the lingering warmth of her gaze when I answered a question correctly, in the almost imperceptible softening of her voice when she addressed me directly, in the way she seemed to create small, almost invisible, pockets of shared intimacy amidst the public space of the classroom. One afternoon, I stayed late, ostensibly to discuss a particularly thorny passage in Wuthering Heights. The classroom was empty, the late autumn sun casting long, melancholic shadows across the worn wooden desks. Ms. Hayes was at her own desk, grading papers, her dark hair, usually so immaculately pinned, escaping in a few soft tendrils around her face, making her look younger, more vulnerable. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, a tiny, almost invisible frown line between her eyebrows. I found myself just watching her for a moment. The way the light caught the curve of her cheekbone, the slight, almost imperceptible movement of her lips as she read, the focused intensity of her gaze. My heart ached with a strange, unfamiliar tenderness, a feeling that was so potent, so overwhelming, it almost frightened me. "Miss Hayes?" I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her sapphire eyes, when they met mine, seeming to clear, to focus, as if she were emerging from some deep, private reverie. A faint smile touched her lips. "Alara," she said, her voice, that low, melodic timbre that always seemed to vibrate somewhere deep inside me. "I was just thinking about your last essay, the one on the symbolism of the Moors. It was quite remarkable." Praise from Miss Hayes was rare, and always meticulously considered, never effusive. To hear her call my work remarkable sent a thrill of pleasure, of pride, coursing through me. "Thank you," I managed, my cheeks warming. I I really connected with that book." "I could tell," she said, her gaze holding mine. "You have a way of inhabiting the text, Alara, of feeling its pulse. It's a rare gift." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes still fixed on me, and then she said it again, those two simple, devastating words. My favorite. This time, there was no mistaking the emphasis, the quiet, deliberate intensity. It wasn't a casual remark, it was a statement, a declaration, a secret shared between us in the hushed intimacy of that empty classroom. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm. I didn't know what to say, what to do. The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken emotions, with a tension so palpable it was almost unbearable. I I don't know what to say," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled. A slow, enigmatic curve of her lips, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity straight through me. "There's nothing to say, Ilara," she murmured, her voice a silken caress. "Some things are simply understood." Understood. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication, with a dawning, terrifying, exhilarating awareness. She understood. She knew. She felt it too. The thought was like a dam breaking within me, releasing a flood of emotions. Relief, certainly, but also a profound, unsettling fear, and a wild, reckless, undeniable excitement. We talked for a long time that afternoon, not just about Wuthering Heights, but about other books, other ideas, other passions. The conversation flowed effortlessly, a seamless, intricate dance of intellect and emotion. And all the while, that unspoken understanding, that shared secret, hummed beneath the surface, a constant low-level thrum of awareness, of anticipation. As the light outside began to fade, casting the room in a soft, crepuscular glow, she stood up, a signal that our stolen time was drawing to a close. I rose too, my legs feeling a little unsteady, my mind still reeling from the intensity of our conversation, from the implications of her quiet, devastating pronouncement. "Thank you, Miss Hayes," I said, my voice still a little shaky, for everything." She walked me to the door, her presence a warm, unsettling heat beside me. As I reached for the doorknob, her hand came up, covering mine, her fingers cool and surprisingly firm, her touch sending a jolt of electricity up my arm. "Alara," she said softly, her voice a low, husky whisper close to my ear. Her breath, warm and smelling faintly of Earl Grey tea, fanned across my neck, sending a shiver down my spine. "Be careful. Be careful." The words, so simple, so anodyne, yet in this context, spoken in that voice, with that touch, they were laden with a universe of unspoken meaning, a warning, an invitation, a promise. I looked up, my eyes meeting hers, and what I saw there, in the shadowy depths of her sapphire gaze, made my breath catch, my heart stop. It was a raw, untamed hunger, a fierce, possessive tenderness, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by her usual enigmatic mask. She released my hand, her touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long, and stepped back, creating a small, almost imperceptible distance between us. "I'll see you in class tomorrow," she said, her voice regaining its professional crispness, though her eyes still held that faint, unsettling glimmer. I nodded, unable to speak, and fled the classroom, my heart pounding, my mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Her words, my favorite, echoed in my ears, a dangerous, intoxicating incantation. And her final, whispered warning, "Be careful," was a stark, chilling reminder of the precipice upon which we both now stood. The carefully ordered garden of my life was not just tilted, it was on the verge of a seismic, cataclysmic upheaval. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that I was powerless to stop it. Powerless, and perhaps, just perhaps, unwilling. The frequency of our after-school discussions increased, a silent, mutual agreement that bypassed the need for explicit invitations. These stolen hours, in the quiet solitude of her classroom, became the focal point of my existence, the moments I lived for, the moments that fueled my increasingly vivid, increasingly forbidden fantasies. My academic performance, already strong, soared to new heights. I devoured texts, not just for the grades, but for the opportunity to engage with her, to dissect ideas, to bask in the focused intensity of her attention. Every essay I wrote, every comment I made in class, was a carefully crafted offering, a desperate attempt to impress her, to connect with her, to draw her closer. And she, in turn, seemed to revel in our intellectual sparring, her sapphire eyes lighting up with a fierce intelligence when I challenged her, her lips curving into that enigmatic, appreciative smile when I articulated a particularly complex thought. But beneath the surface of our academic discourse, the unspoken, illicit current continued to flow, growing stronger, more insistent, with each passing day. The physical awareness between us was a constant, low-level hum, a tightly coiled spring of anticipation that left me perpetually on edge, my senses heightened, my body alive with a strange, unfamiliar energy. The accidental touches became less accidental, more deliberate, more lingering. Her hand brushing mine, as we both reached for the same book, her fingers tracing a line on the page of an open text, perilously close to my own. Her hip grazing mine as she leaned over my desk to point out a passage, her scent, that intoxicating blend of old books and Earl Grey tea, enveloping me in a dizzying, disorienting cloud. Each touch, however fleeting, however seemingly innocuous, was like a tiny, exquisite torture, a spark that threatened to ignite the already smoldering embers of my desire. My internal world was a battleground, a relentless tug-of-war between my carefully constructed identity, Lena, the good student, the sensible girl, the straight girl with the perfectly nice boyfriend, and this new, terrifying, exhilarating self that was emerging in response to Ms. Hayes's presence, to her attention, to her allure. The guilt was a constant, gnawing companion, a bitter counterpoint to the intoxicating sweetness of my forbidden desires. I thought of Mark, of his easygoing affection, his uncomplicated love, and a wave of shame would wash over me. How could I betray him like this, even if only in my thoughts, in my fantasies? How could I reconcile the Lena he knew, the Lena I had always believed myself to be, with this new, desire-ridden creature who yearned for the touch, the attention, the something of another woman? My teacher. The thought was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, a stark reminder of the abyss of impropriety that yawned before me. I started to avoid Mark's calls, to make excuses when he suggested we get together. Our conversations, once easy and familiar, now felt strained, artificial, punctuated by long, awkward silences. He sensed the distance, I knew, though he didn't understand its cause. He attributed it to the stress of my studies, to my ambition, and I let him, too cowardly, too confused, to articulate the truth, a truth that was becoming increasingly, terrifyingly, undeniable. One late afternoon, as a storm raged outside, lashing rain against the tall classroom windows, creating a sense of enforced intimacy, of being cocooned together in our own private world, Miss Hayes did something that shattered the last vestiges of my carefully constructed defenses. We were discussing a particularly bleak, nihilistic poem, its themes of despair and existential dread resonating a little too closely with my own internal turmoil. I must have looked particularly troubled, because she paused, mid-sentence, her sapphire eyes softening with a concern that took me by surprise. "Are you all right, Alara?" she asked, her voice that low, melodic timbre that always seemed to bypass my rational mind and speak directly to my soul. "You seem distant today." "I'm fine." I lied, my voice a little shaky. "Just a lot on my mind." She didn't press, but her gaze remained fixed on me, a gentle, unwavering scrutiny that made me feel both exposed and strangely comforted. She walked over to the window, her silhouette framed against the gray, rain-streaked glass, a figure of elegant melancholy. "Storms can be unsettling, can't they?" she mused, her voice barely audible above the drumming of the rain. "They stir things up, bring things to the surface that are usually hidden in the depths." She turned then, her eyes meeting mine, and there was a raw, untamed emotion in their sapphire depths, a vulnerability that mirrored my own. "Sometimes," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, almost to a whisper, "it's easier to face the storm within when there's a storm without." She walked back towards me, slowly, deliberately, her gaze never leaving mine. She stopped directly in front of my desk, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, so close I could see the tiny, almost invisible lines around her eyes, the subtle pulse beating at the base of her throat. The air between us crackled, thick with an almost unbearable tension. The scent of her, that intoxicating blend of old books and Earl Grey tea, now mingled with the faint, metallic scent of ozone from the storm, filled my senses, making me feel dizzy, lightheaded. "Alara," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the charged silence. Her hand lifted, slowly, tentatively, and reached towards my face. Her fingers, cool and surprisingly steady, gently cupped my cheek. Her touch was like a brand, searing my skin, sending an explosion of sensation through my entire body. I closed my eyes, a soft sigh escaping my lips. This was it. The moment I had both dreaded and craved. The culmination of months of unspoken longing, of forbidden desire. There was no turning back now. Her thumb gently stroked my cheek, a feather-light caress that sent shivers down my spine. I leaned into her touch, a silent surrender, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and a desperate, exhilarating anticipation. When I opened my eyes, her face was inches from mine, her lips slightly parted, her breath warm and sweet against my skin. "You are so beautiful, Alara," she murmured, her voice rough, with an emotion I couldn't quite name. And then, she leaned in, slowly, deliberately, and her lips met mine. The fifth part of our clandestine story unfolded in the hushed, rain-lashed intimacy of Ms. Hayes's empty classroom, a stolen moment where the carefully constructed boundaries between teacher and student, between propriety and desire, dissolved like mist in a sudden, unexpected downpour. Her lips, when they finally met mine, were softer than I could have ever imagined, yet there was an underlying firmness, a surprising, intoxicating confidence in their exploration. It wasn't a hesitant kiss, not a tentative brushing of mouths. It was a conscious, deliberate claiming, a silent, passionate acknowledgement of the unspoken, illicit current that had been simmering between us for so long. The initial shock, the jolt of pure, unadulterated disbelief that this was actually happening, gave way to an overwhelming surge of sensation, a tidal wave of emotions that threatened to drown me in its intensity. My mind, usually a bastion of rational thought, of anxious self-recrimination, went blissfully, gloriously, blank. There was only this: the feel of her lips on mine, the warmth of her hand cupping my cheek, the intoxicating scent of her, that unique, unforgettable blend of old books, Earl Grey tea, and something else. Something wilder, more elemental, something that was purely, intoxicatingly, Evelyn. A soft sigh escaped my lips, a sound of surrender, of release, of a longing so profound, so deeply ingrained, it felt as if it had been a part of me for an eternity. My own hands, as if with a will of their own, came up to rest on her shoulders, my fingers gripping the soft fabric of her blouse, needing to anchor myself in the storm of sensation that was consuming me. She responded to my touch by deepening the kiss, her tongue, surprisingly bold, tracing the seam of my lips, a silent, insistent question. I parted them, a silent, eager invitation, and her tongue delved into my mouth, a silken, knowing invader that mapped the sensitive contours, igniting fires I hadn't known existed. It was a kiss of discovery, a dance of exploration, a mutual unveiling of desires that had been suppressed for too long. There was a desperation in it, a hunger, but also a surprising, disarming tenderness, a reverence, almost, as if we both understood the fragile, precious, and utterly forbidden nature of this moment. The rain outside continued its relentless assault, a wild elemental soundtrack to the equally untamed storm, raging within the four walls of that classroom. The dim, gray light filtering through the rain-streaked windows cast us in a shadowy, intimate glow, cocooning us in our own private world. A world where the rules of the outside, the judgments, the consequences, ceased to exist. Her hand, the one that had been cupping my cheek, slid downwards, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw, then my neck, sending shivers of anticipation cascading through me. Her touch was feather-light, yet it felt like a brand, searing my skin, leaving a trail of incandescent heat in its wake. She pulled back, just slightly, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her forehead resting against mine. Her sapphire eyes, when they met mine, were dark and luminous, filled with a raw, untamed hunger that mirrored my own. "Lena," she whispered, her voice a low, husky caress, my name on her lips, a prayer, a plea, an incantation. "This is madness." "I know," I breathed, my own voice equally unsteady, but the knowledge did nothing to quell the fierce, insistent yearning that consumed me. If this was madness, then I wanted to be consumed by it, to lose myself in its intoxicating depths. She kissed me again, a hard, desperate kiss that tasted of rain and longing and the bittersweet tang of forbidden fruit. Her other hand came up to cradle my face, her fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer, until there was no space left between us, until our bodies were pressed together, a desperate, searing embrace. I could feel the lean strength of her body, the rapid beat of her heart against mine, a frantic, synchronized rhythm. The world narrowed to this single, incandescent point of contact, to the feel of her body moving against mine, to the sound of her ragged breathing, to the intoxicating scent of her arousal. Nothing else mattered. There was only this fierce, desperate, beautiful act of mutual surrender. We stumbled, a tangle of limbs and shared desire, and somehow ended up pressed against her large, oak desk, the cool, polished wood, a stark contrast to the heat that was consuming us. The books and papers scattered across its surface were unceremoniously swept aside, clattering to the floor, forgotten casualties of our escalating passion. Her hands were everywhere, exploring, learning, her touch both tender and demanding, coaxing from me a response that was both a surrender and a fierce, untamed assertion of my own burgeoning desire. She unbuttoned my blouse with fumbling, eager fingers, her knuckles brushing against my skin, sending fresh waves of electricity through me. The fabric parted, revealing the plain, cotton bra I wore, a stark, virginal contrast to the wild, untamed emotions raging within me. Her gaze dropped, her sapphire eyes raking over me, a slow, deliberate appraisal that made my skin prickle, my breath catch in my throat. A faint, almost predatory smile touched her lips. "Beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with an emotion that was both possessive and reverent. Her fingers, cool and surprisingly steady, traced the lace edge of my bra, then moved lower, to the sensitive skin of my stomach, her touch sending spirals of exquisite torment radiating outwards, down to the very core of my being. I arched into her touch, a silent plea for more, a soft moan escaping my lips. She responded by deepening the kiss, her mouth devouring mine, her tongue a silken, knowing invader, as her hands continued their exploration, unhooking the clasp of my bra with a deft, practiced ease that sent a fresh jolt of arousal through me. The garment fell away, and her hands cupped my breasts, her touch both gentle and firm, her thumb stroking my already hardened nipples, sending spirals of pleasure radiating outwards, down to the very tips of my toes. I cried out, a small, choked sound, my head falling back, exposing my throat, a gesture of complete and utter submission. She took advantage of my vulnerability, her lips leaving mine to trace a searing path down my neck, her teeth nipping gently at the sensitive skin, eliciting a fresh wave of shivers, of an almost painful pleasure. This was it, the precipice, the point of no return, the moment where a single word, a single gesture, could change everything, irrevocably and forever. And as her mouth closed over my breast, her tongue, her teeth, beginning a new, even more intimate exploration, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that the carefully ordered garden of my life was not just tilted, it was in ruins. And in its place, something wild, something beautiful, something terrifyingly, exhilaratingly, new was about to bloom, watered by the storm of our shared forbidden desire. The world dissolved into a symphony of sensation, orchestrated by Ms. Hayes's knowing hands and insatiable mouth. The cool, polished wood of her desk pressed against my back, a stark, grounding reality in the maelstrom of pleasure that consumed me. The rain outside had become a distant, muffled roar, a backdrop to the more immediate, more urgent, storm raging within the four walls of that classroom, within the confines of our entwined bodies. Her lips, her tongue, were a relentless, intoxicating torment on my breasts, suckling, teasing, laving, until I was writhing, moaning, my fingers clenching and unclenching in the soft, fragrant waves of her dark hair. Each pull of her mouth sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated pleasure straight to my core, a sensation so intense it bordered on pain, a pain I welcomed, craved, reveled in. Her free hand, the one not tangled in my hair, slid lower, over the flat expanse of my stomach, her fingers tracing lazy, tantalizing circles that made my muscles clench in anticipation. Then, lower still, her touch becoming more intimate, more daring, her fingers brushing against the waistband of my skirt. I gasped, my body arching off the desk, a silent plea, a desperate invitation. She seemed to understand, her fingers deftly unfastening the button, then the zipper, the sound surprisingly loud in the charged silence, broken only by our ragged breathing and the relentless drumming of the rain. The fabric parted, and her hand slid beneath, her cool, dry fingers finding the warm, damp skin of my hip, then moving inwards, towards the soft curls at the apex of my thighs. Her touch was electric, a shock wave that made me cry out her name, a raw, broken sound. Evelyn. It was the first time I had dared to speak her given name, and the sound of it on my own lips. In this context, in this moment, was both terrifying and exhilaratingly, liberatingly, intimate. She paused, her head lifting, her sapphire eyes, dark and dilated, meeting mine. There was a flicker of surprise in them, quickly followed by a slow, predatory smile, a smile that acknowledged the shift, the transgression, the irrevocable crossing of a boundary. Yes? Lena? She murmured, her voice a low, husky purr, the sound of my name on her lips, a caress, a promise, a possession. Her fingers, those long, elegant, knowing fingers, continued their exploration, parting the delicate folds, finding the slick, swollen nub of my clitoris. Her touch was exquisite, a symphony of sensation, one moment feather-light, the next firm and insistent, each caress igniting new fires, awakening dormant nerve endings, drawing from me soft, involuntary moans that seemed to please her immensely. I was lost, adrift on a sea of pleasure, my body a taut, quivering bowstring, every nerve ending alive, screaming for release. My mind, usually a whirl of anxious thought, was blissfully, gloriously, empty. There was only sensation, raw, untamed, elemental. Her mouth left my breast, her lips tracing a searing path down my stomach, over the curve of my hip, towards the source of her intimate ministrations. I gasped, my eyes flying open, my body tensing in anticipation, in a strange, thrilling mixture of fear and an almost unbearable excitement. Evelyn, no, you can't, I stammered, the words a weak token protest, a last, desperate attempt to cling to some semblance of propriety, of control. She looked up at me, her sapphire eyes glowing with a dark, possessive fire, her lips curved into that slow, enigmatic smile. Oh, but I can, Lena, she whispered, her voice a silken command that I was powerless to resist. And I will. And then, her head dipped lower, and her mouth, that beautiful, intelligent, articulate mouth that had spoken of poetry and philosophy, and the subtle ironies of Victorian literature, found me, in the most intimate, most vulnerable, most exquisitely, damnably, pleasurable way imaginable. The first touch of her tongue was like a brand, a shockwave of pure, unadulterated sensation that made me cry out, a raw, keening sound that was swallowed by the drumming of the rain. My body arched off the desk, my fingers clenching into fists, my entire being consumed by a pleasure so intense, so overwhelming, it bordered on agony. She was relentless. Her tongue, her lips, her teeth, orchestrating a symphony of torment and ecstasy, teasing, tasting, devouring, until I was writhing, moaning, begging for release. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of sensation, a maelstrom of heat and moisture and yielding flesh. Time ceased to exist. There was only this dark, intimate sanctuary, this shared exploration of the furthest reaches of pleasure. And then, I felt it. The first, subtle tremor, the telltale clenching of my inner muscles, the sharp, indrawn breath that signaled the approaching release. Evelyn, I gasped, my voice a ragged, broken plea. I'm going to. Yes, Lena, she whispered against my skin, her voice a low, husky growl, a sound that vibrated through me, igniting every nerve ending. Let go. Let go for me. And I did. With a final, desperate surge of movement, a guttural cry torn from my throat, the world exploded in a blinding flash of white-hot pleasure, a shattering, transcendent release that left me gasping, trembling, my body convulsing in a series of shuddering aftershocks. I clung to the edge of the desk, anchoring myself in the eye of the storm, tears of pure, unadulterated ecstasy streaming down my face. She held me, her arms strong and steady, her lips still pressed against me, tasting the aftermath of my release, a profound sense of triumph, of completion, washing over me. As the waves subsided, leaving me limp and sated, my body humming with a languid, delicious exhaustion, she lifted her head, her sapphire eyes, dark and luminous, meeting mine. Her lips were swollen, her dark hair disheveled, her face flushed with a mixture of exertion and a fierce, possessive tenderness. "My favorite student," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, her lips curving into a slow, satisfied smile. "Now, do you understand why?" And as I looked into those beautiful, intelligent, predatory eyes, eyes that had seen my soul, tasted my essence, claimed my surrender, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that this was just the beginning. The lesson had been learned, the favorite had been shown, and the carefully ordered garden of my life was now a wild, untamed, exquisitely, damnably beautiful wilderness. The aftermath of that cataclysmic release left me boneless, draped over the edge of Ms. Hayes's, no, Evelyn's, desk like a discarded doll, my limbs trembling, my mind a blissful, empty void. The scent of our mingled arousal, of rain-soaked wool and old books and the sharp, metallic tang of spent passion, filled the small, charged space of the classroom, a potent, intoxicating perfume. Evelyn rose slowly, her movements fluid, almost serpentine, despite the raw, untamed energy that still seemed to hum around her. She adjusted her clothing, a subtle, almost unconscious gesture of reasserting some semblance of her usual composed facade, though her sapphire eyes, when they met mine, still burned with a dark, possessive fire. She came to stand before me, looking down, her expression a complex, unreadable mix of triumph, tenderness, and something else, something that looked almost like hunger. A hunger that had been sated, perhaps, but not extinguished. Never extinguished. "Well, Lena," she said, her voice a low, husky purr, that faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. "Was the lesson to your satisfaction?" I could only nod, my throat still tight with unshed emotion, my body still humming with the aftershocks of her intimate, devastating tutelage. Satisfaction didn't even begin to cover it. It had been a revelation, a transformation, a journey to a place within myself I hadn't known existed, a place she had not just discovered, but claimed. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, her touch sending a fresh wave of shivers through me, a jolt of awareness that was both unwelcome and undeniably, perversely, thrilling. "Good," she murmured, her thumb stroking my cheekbone, a feather, light caress that made my breath catch, my entire being focused on that single, electrifying point of contact. "Because there will be further instruction. Further instruction." The words, spoken in her low, resonant contralto, hung in the air, a promise, a threat, an irresistible invitation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, frantic bird, beating its wings against the bars of its cage. A cage I was no longer sure I wanted to escape. She leaned in, her lips brushing against my ear, her warm breath sending shivers down my spine. "You are a quick study, Lena," she whispered, her voice a silken caress, "and I find myself eager to explore the full depths of your potential. Potential." The word, so academic, so anodyne, yet in her mouth, in this context, it was laden with a universe of forbidden possibility. I looked into those luminous, predatory sapphire eyes, and I saw a reflection of my own burgeoning desire, my own reckless curiosity, my own desperate, undeniable need. And in that moment, the last vestiges of my carefully constructed morality, of my sensible, predictable self, crumbled into dust. The old Lena was gone, shattered, remade in the crucible of Evelyn's desire. And the new Lena, this strange, trembling, exhilarated creature, she wanted more. More lessons. More instruction. More. "Evelyn. The storm has passed, Lena," she said softly, her gaze flicking towards the rain-streaked window, where the last, angry vestiges of the downpour were giving way to a watery, uncertain twilight. "But the one within us, that, I suspect, is just beginning." She offered me her hand, her cool, dry fingers closing around mine with a surprising, possessive strength. "Come," she said, her voice a low, silken command. "There are other classrooms, other subjects I wish to explore with you." And as she led me from that ransacked, passion-soaked classroom out into the shadowy, echoing hallways of the deserted school, a new, terrifying, exhilarating chapter of my life, beginning with each step we took, I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that I was no longer just her student. I was her discovery, her creation, her favorite. And the price of that favor, I was beginning to realize, was my entire world. A world I was now, willingly, recklessly, surrendering to her. The days and weeks that followed our lesson in the storm-swept classroom were a dizzying, disorienting blur of illicit encounters and carefully constructed deceptions. The school, once a familiar, predictable landscape, transformed into a labyrinth of secret assignations, of stolen moments, of charged, fleeting glances that spoke volumes in the silent, coded language of our forbidden affair. Evelyn, for I could no longer think of her as Miss Hayes, not after the raw, untamed intimacy we had shared, was a masterful conductor of this clandestine symphony. She orchestrated our encounters with a skill, a precision, that was both thrilling and terrifying, a forgotten book that required my retrieval from her locked office after hours, an urgent need for assistance with a school event that necessitated our working late into the evening, alone, in the echoing emptiness of the auditorium. A chance meeting in a deserted corner of the library, where the scent of old paper and her intoxicating perfume would mingle, creating an atmosphere of almost unbearable erotic tension. Each encounter was a fresh exploration, a new lesson in the intoxicating, dangerous curriculum of her desire. She was an inventive, insatiable lover. Her body, a landscape I was endlessly, fascinatingly, compelled to map. She taught me things about my own body, about my own capacity for pleasure, that I had never imagined, never dared to dream. She awakened a hunger within me, a raw, primal need that mirrored her own, a need that only she could satisfy. Our classroom was no longer confined to the physical space of Northwood High. It expanded, contracted, transformed. It was the shadowy intimacy of her small, book-lined apartment, where the scent of Earl Grey tea and old secrets mingled with the muskier, more potent aroma of our shared passion. It was the surprising anonymity of a crowded city street, where a fleeting brush of her hand against mine, a lingering gaze across a crowded cafe, could ignite a firestorm of desire. It was even, sometimes, the chaste, frustrating confines of my own dorm room, where a whispered, late-night phone call, her voice a low, husky caress in the darkness, could leave me breathless, aching, consumed by a longing so intense it was almost a physical pain. But the school remained our primary stage, the place where the inherent risk, the constant threat of discovery, added a sharp, illicit thrill to our encounters. The janitor's closet became a surprisingly versatile boudoir. The dusty, forgotten storage room at the back of the gymnasium, a surprisingly comfortable trysting place. Even her own classroom, after the last student had departed, the door locked, the blinds drawn, became a sanctuary for our forbidden rites. We learned to communicate in code, in subtle gestures, in loaded phrases that held a secret, intimate meaning for us alone. A particular passage in a poem, read aloud in class, could be an invitation. A lingering touch on a returned essay, a promise. A specific blend of tea, offered after school, a signal. It was a dangerous game, this dance of deception and desire, and the stakes were impossibly high. The fear of discovery was a constant, gnawing companion, a cold counterpoint to the heat of our passion. Every unexpected knock on the door, every footstep in the hallway, every curious glance from another student or teacher sent a jolt of adrenaline, of panic, through me. But the fear, perversely, only seemed to heighten the pleasure, to intensify the connection. It was as if the forbidden nature of our affair, the inherent transgression, was an essential ingredient in its intoxicating allure. My relationship with Mark, my perfectly nice, perfectly boring boyfriend, withered on the vine, a casualty of my all-consuming obsession with Evelyn. Our phone calls became less frequent, our conversations strained. His cheerful, uncomplicated affection, a jarring, unwelcome reminder of the life I had left behind, the person I no longer was. The breakup, when it finally came, was a quiet, almost anticlimactic affair, a mutual acknowledgement of a distance that had become too vast to bridge. He was sad, confused, but ultimately, I think, relieved. And I felt a strange, hollow ache, a pang of guilt for the pain I had caused him, but also an undeniable, liberating sense of release. I was free. Free to explore this new, terrifying, exhilarating landscape of desire, free to surrender completely to the intoxicating allure of my teacher, my lover, my Evelyn. But freedom, I was beginning to learn, came at a price. The secrecy, the constant vigilance, the gnawing guilt, it all began to take its toll. I was living a double life, a life of carefully constructed lies and stolen moments, and the strain was becoming almost unbearable. There were moments of doubt, of fear, of a profound, unsettling loneliness. Moments when I would look at Evelyn, see the cool, composed mask she wore for the world, and wonder if what we shared was real, or just a dangerous, elaborate fantasy, a folie à deux that was destined to end in disaster. But then she would touch me, her fingers tracing the line of my jaw, her sapphire eyes burning into mine, her voice a low, husky whisper, promising pleasures yet to come, and all my doubts, all my fears, would dissolve in the intoxicating heat of her presence, in the undeniable, irresistible truth of my desire. She was my favorite. I was hers. And the lessons, it seemed, were far from over. The clandestine nature of our affair, while undeniably thrilling, began to cast long, unsettling shadows over my life. The constant need for secrecy, the elaborate deceptions, the gnawing fear of discovery, it was a heavy burden to bear, a corrosive acid that slowly, insidiously, began to eat away at the edges of my carefully constructed composure. My grades, once a source of pride, of validation, began to suffer. How could I concentrate on the intricacies of economic theory or the complexities of cellular biology when my mind was consumed by thoughts of Evelyn, by the memory of her touch, by the anticipation of our next stolen encounter? Sleep became a luxury, my nights plagued by vivid, disturbing dreams, dreams that were a chaotic, unsettling mix of desire and dread, of passion and peril. I'd wake in the pre-dawn darkness, my heart pounding, my body aching, the scent of her, real or imagined, clinging to my skin like a ghostly caress. My friends, the ones from my old life, the life before Evelyn, began to notice the change in me. I was distant, distracted, my laughter forced, my smiles brittle. I made excuses, feigned illness, withdrew into the shadowy, intoxicating world of my secret affair, a world that was both a sanctuary and a prison. Chloe, my roommate, the unwitting link in this dangerous chain, remained blissfully, painfully, oblivious. Her cheerful, uncomplicated presence, once a source of comfort, now felt like a constant, unwelcome reminder of my betrayal, of the duplicity that had become an intrinsic part of my existence. Every shared meal, every casual conversation, every innocent inquiry about my well-being, was a fresh assault on my already frayed nerves, a new layer of guilt added to the already crushing weight of my secret. I found myself avoiding her, retreating into the solitude of my own thoughts, my own desires, a solitude that was becoming increasingly, alarmingly, preferable to the company of others. Evelyn, too, seemed to be feeling the strain. There were new lines of tension around her sapphire eyes, a subtle, almost imperceptible, weariness in her usually composed demeanor. Our stolen moments, once filled with a reckless, exhilarating passion, now often carried an undercurrent of sadness, of a dawning, unspoken awareness of the impossibility, the unsustainability of our situation. "This can't last, Lena," she whispered one night, as we lay tangled in the sheets of her narrow bed, the scent of our mingled arousal, a heavy, intoxicating perfume in the air. "We both know that, don't we?" Her words, so stark, so brutal, so undeniably true, were like a shard of ice piercing my heart. I didn't answer, couldn't answer. I just clung to her, burying my face in the curve of her neck, inhaling her scent, trying to memorize the feel of her body against mine, trying to brand this moment, this precious, fleeting moment, onto my soul. "What will we do?" I finally managed, my voice a hoarse, broken whisper. She sighed, a long, weary sound, and her arms tightened around me, a gesture of comfort, of solidarity, of shared despair. "I don't know, my love," she murmured, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher. "I honestly don't know. But we can't. We can't keep playing with fire. Sooner or later, we're both going to get burned." Burned. The word hung in the air, heavy and ominous, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was right. The end was inevitable. A looming, shadowy presence on the horizon, growing closer, more menacing, with each passing day. The thought of a life without her, without the intoxicating thrill of her presence, without the searing heat of her touch, was a desolate, unbearable prospect. She had become my world, my sun, the axis around which my entire existence revolved. How could I go back to the bland, predictable landscape of my old life, now that I had tasted the forbidden, intoxicating fruit of her desire? The semester was drawing to a close, the final exams a looming, unwelcome intrusion into the shadowy, intoxicating world of our affair. The end of our time together, at least in this capacity, as teacher and student, as secret lovers sharing stolen moments in the hallowed, compromised halls of Northwood High, was fast approaching. And with it, a sense of impending doom, of an inevitable, heartbreaking reckoning. We clung to each other with a new, desperate intensity, our encounters imbued with a poignant, bittersweet urgency, a heightened awareness of the precious, fleeting nature of our time together. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment felt like a farewell, a last, desperate attempt to capture, to preserve, the fragile, beautiful, terrifying magic of what we had shared. The further instruction, Evelyn had promised, it continued, but it was no longer just about physical pleasure. It was about a deeper, more profound connection, a merging of minds, of souls, a shared exploration of the darkest, most vulnerable corners of our beings. We talked for hours, sharing our hopes, our fears, our dreams, our regrets, baring our souls to each other in a way that was both terrifying and exhilaratingly, liberatingly intimate. She told me of her own past, of a life filled with quiet sorrows and unfulfilled longings, of a marriage that had been a gilded cage, of a passion for literature that had been her only solace, her only escape. And I, in turn, confessed my own insecurities, my own uncertainties, my own dawning, terrifying realization that the life I had always thought I wanted was not the life I truly craved. In those moments, the boundaries between us, the roles of teacher and student, of older woman and younger, dissolved completely. We were just two souls, adrift in a sea of confusion and desire, clinging to each other for warmth, for comfort, for a fleeting, precious sense of connection in a world that often felt cold, indifferent, and unforgiving. The end, when it came, was not a dramatic explosion, not a scandalous exposé, but a quiet, almost anticlimactic, unraveling. It was the last day of exams. I had just finished my final paper, my mind a numb, exhausted blank. I walked out of the examination hall, blinking in the harsh, unforgiving sunlight, feeling a strange, hollow ache in my chest, a sense of an ending, of a chapter closing. And there she was, Evelyn, waiting for me at the foot of the steps, her sapphire eyes, when they met mine, filled with a sadness so profound, so palpable, it stole the air from my lungs. She didn't speak, just offered me her hand. I took it, her cool, dry fingers closing around mine with a familiar, possessive strength. We walked in silence, away from the bustling crowds of students, away from the prying eyes, towards a secluded, forgotten corner of the campus, a small, overgrown garden I hadn't even known existed. We sat on a weathered stone bench, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and late-blooming roses, their petals a deep, mournful crimson. The silence stretched, heavy and pregnant, with unspoken words, with unshed tears. "So," she said finally, her voice a low, husky whisper, "this is it. This is it." The words, so simple, so final, were like a death knell. I I guess so. I managed, my own voice equally unsteady, my throat tight with an emotion I couldn't name. "What now?" She sighed, a long, weary sound, and her gaze drifted towards the fading light, towards the encroaching shadows. "Now," she said softly, "now we say goodbye. Goodbye." The word, so final, so absolute, was a physical pain, a sharp, tearing agony in my chest. "But why?" I whispered, the question a desperate, childish plea. "We could, we could try. After, after I'm no longer your student." She turned to me then, her sapphire eyes, now glistening with unshed tears, meeting mine. And what I saw there, in their depths, was not just sadness, but a profound, unwavering love. A love that was both a benediction and a curse. "Oh, my sweet, foolish Lena," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't you see? It wouldn't work. The world. The world wouldn't let it. And I couldn't bear to see you hurt, to see your future compromised, because of me." She reached out and gently cupped my cheek, her thumb stroking away a tear I hadn't even realized had fallen. "You are my favorite, Lena," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "You always will be. And because you are, I have to let you go. Let me go." The words were a death sentence, a condemnation to a life without her, without the intoxicating thrill of her presence, without the searing heat of her touch. But as I looked into those beautiful, intelligent, loving eyes, I knew, with a certainty that both shattered and remade me, that she was right. This was the only way. The only impossible, heartbreaking way. She leaned in and kissed me, a soft, lingering kiss, a kiss of tenderness, of farewell, of a love that could never be spoken, never be acknowledged, never be fulfilled. A kiss that tasted of salt and roses, and the bittersweet tang of an ending. "Go, Lena," she whispered against my lips. "Go and live your life. Be brilliant. Be happy. And sometimes, think of me." And then, she stood up, turned, and walked away, her elegant figure receding into the encroaching shadows, leaving me alone on that weathered stone bench. The scent of damp earth and dying roses, filling my senses. The taste of her farewell kiss, still lingering on my lips. My heart a shattered, aching void. The lesson was over. The favorite had been shown. And the price of that favor, I now understood, was a lifetime of beautiful, terrible, unforgettable longing.